It's not quite time yet. A couple of minutes to go. The ceiling, you made a bit of a mistake because you see the panel that's red with gold on it. If you had the sort of logical sort of progression of it, that red one up there should be gold.
Yeah. Oh, it should be, yeah. Yes.
Got it wrong?
Yeah. To make it.
Because we've got the green, and then we've got red at either side, then we've got blue at either side of that, and then red again, except it should be the gold one. Then green, then ended with the red and white.
Okay, we're doing a mic test for the people in the back. Can the people in the back hear me fine? I've got a thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up all around. Okay, that's perfect. Hello everybody, and welcome back to Minster for our next edition of our bi-weekly Heritage Talks series as part of our 600th anniversary at the Minster. And for those of you who have been at Heritage Talks at the Minster before, welcome back. My name is James, I'm the Heritage Project Manager here at Minster, and I'm really delighted to be able to present this Heritage Talk with you today. If it's your first time at one of these, I'll give you the gist. These used to be a thing that ran semi-frequently. They were sort of a dead moment, and now we're celebrating our 600th anniversary, and we're beginning to run these talks bi-weekly on Fridays now. So there's always going to be 2 or 3 talks a month for you to catch up on. Full of really fantastic guest speakers, whether it be local tour guides, academics, or just local people with a real interest in history who want to share that passion with you. Now for those of you with a slightly more macabre sense of history, I think that this talk, you can see on the screen already, is going to be for you, because this talk is about grave robbing. I've written in the advertising for this talk a quote from a man called Robert Atwood, who said that grave robbing, quoting here, obliterates the memory of the ancient world and turns its highest artistic creations into decorations, adornments on a shelf, divorced from historical context, and ultimately from all meaning. Which is quite deplorable when you put it like that. So hopefully by the end of this talk, presented by the wonderful Pete Lowden, who I'm hopefully pronouncing the last name correctly, Lowden, excellent, not Lowden, you'll be able to learn a little bit more about that side of history, especially in the local perspective of Hull and East Yorkshire. So without taking up too much more of your time, I will pass this very complicated lapel mic off to Pete. Hopefully he can figure it out and enjoy the talk. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
As James said, it's rather a macabre subject. Anyway, let's move on. Glasses, because obviously I can't read without them. The first problem with a talk like this is that there are actually no photographs of these events taking place. No of the people involved with them. Not only did they pursue their occupations under cover of darkness, but cameras hadn't been invented. So to do a talk under these circumstances is difficult, and the audience should take that into consideration, please. A lot of the images used in this talk are stock ones and are simply to keep your attention on the screen and not on me. So, the next problem we have to understand is how stealing bodies became an economic activity, as it isn't something one would think of as such. If you're walking along and saw a dead body in the street, you wouldn't think, oh, hang on, I might make some money on this. In the 18th century, in the early 19th century, it really was that kind of well. The seeds of this activity were sown a long time ago when the study of medicine was in its infancy. If it wasn't some quack dispensing tongue of toad to stop you vomiting, it was saying prayers, it was saying prayers to drive out the evil spirits that had taken root in you. Medicine was still firmly in the grip of Aristotle's four humours, which dictated how you were to be treated by the medical fraternity, not what was wrong with you. You were treated as to your character, which had to fall into one of four categories: choleric, melancholic, etc., etc. Once that was established, then treatment could begin. As you can imagine, it wasn't always successful, which is where the wise women came in. Usually some old woman practicing locally who treat diseases and ailments with herbs they'd found and processed. Sadly, as they were usually more successful at treating people than the established medical, and that whole sorry story took on a new turn, which we won't go into today. Because the four humours was the basis of medical practice, which went on inside the body, what went on inside the body was a mystery, which no one knew about. Galen, a Roman physician some 300 years after Aristotle, did some rudimentary anatomy on pigs and dogs. He lived roughly around about AD 160 to AD 220. And there's a famous plague named after him. Sorry, but I digress sometimes. This anatomy on pigs and dogs, he decided, was exactly the same as what was going on in humans. So where a dog's liver was, it was exactly the same place in the human. Where the lungs were, obviously the same place. And that was the accepted practice for roughly about 1,000 years. As the Catholic Church was quite resistant to new thoughts in most things, anatomy was frowned upon, and people who indulged in it, such as Leonardo da Vinci, were soon made aware of the risks that they were running. There were always room for one more at the stake. So any experimenting was clandestine. This chap featured here is Andrea Vesalius, 1514 to 1564. He lived in what is now the Netherlands, which was then owned by Spain, one of the most Catholic of Catholic countries, and the home of the Spanish Inquisition, which none of us expects. He was interested in how the body worked, so he procured the body of the criminal from the gibbet and performed an anatomical study of that body. This he published in 1543. It was called De Humani Fabrica, and it became a standard reference work for the next 200 years. Later on, he had to burn his notebooks and copies of the book to save his life, but some happily survived. By the early 17th century, various anatomy schools were springing up, especially in some northern Italian cities and in Paris. Interest in what was going on inside the body was growing, and it eventually travelled to Britain. In 1628, William Harvey demonstrated to Charles I how blood travelled around the body by using anatomy. By the mid-18th century, anatomy was something of the coming thing. It was taught, as this print of Hogarth's shows, by demonstrating on an actual dead body. Henry VIII had allowed 4 bodies of criminals to be handed over to the United Company of Barber Surgeons after those people had been hanged. Charles II increased that number by 2 in the 1660s, so effectively there were 6 bodies being handed over to the Company of Barber Surgeons. That was per year, which obviously wasn't enough for the anatomy schools. And now we can start seeing the economic aspects. So suddenly a dead body had become a commodity worth having. And so we come to William Hunter. But first, let's just digress a little about the Barber Surgeon Company. Henry VIII had amalgamated these 2 guilds. By Charles II's time, there were fractures in the company. and barbers were transforming themselves into doctors and dentists. You would often go to a barber to have some bloodletting or have a tooth extracted. Surgeons were devoting more of their time to anatomical studies. In this way, this is why doctors are proud of their designation of doctor, while surgeons are proud that they are referred to as Mr. or Ms. these days. So, in 1745, the Company of Surgeons was established in the Old Bailey, not the new Old Bailey, which stands on that side. The old Bailey was next to Newgate Prison, which was handy if you wanted dead bodies. And surgeons did. In the days of public execution, there was often a tussle between the family and friends of the deceased and the students as to who claimed the dead body. Violent fights often occurred with many of the crowd joining in. They didn't have TV. With the relatives of the deceased going in, and often many of the crowd did as well. In some ways, the crowd often sided with the relatives, however villainous the person was being hanged. Because this tied in with the belief that the body should be whole when resurrection day happened, and obviously anatomical studies didn't leave much to bury. The other aspect was that many in the crowd, living under the justice of the bloody code of the Hanoverian times, probably thought we could put them up next on the scaffold. William Hunter is a figure written large in medicine history, and without him surgery would not have moved on as well or as fast as it did. He was quite a wealthy chap, and he indulged himself in medicine at a time when it wasn't really the kind of thing. He was a good guy in some ways, but he did encourage grave robbing. It was said that hampers full of dead bodies were delivered to his front. Both of them were alcoholics. Another lodger, an old man, was also close to death, but lingered on, so Burke and Hare helped him on his way. And thus began a spate of murders, which eventually caused some suspicion and police involvement. Hare turned King's evidence against Burke, who was hanged and his body sent to the anatomy school. Hare had to flee for his life from Edinburgh, and there is a tale that he fell into a lime pit in Liverpool and died horribly. Dr. Knox also had to leave Edinburgh and died in obscurity. Their activities led to a new word in the English language, Burking, which meant to murder, to sell the corpse. Incidentally, there is a connection here with Hull with regard to Burke and Hare. One of the most famous victims was a lad called Daft Jamie, who was a teenager who lived in Edinburgh. He was probably about in his late teens, maybe 20, 22, but he was educationally disadvantaged, and he had some issues with learning difficulties. He was placed in Hull by a Hull local historian called Bernard Foster, who wrote a very good book, if you can get hold of it, Living and Dying. It's quite expensive on eBay these days, but they do have copies in the Hull History Centre. He actually cites that Daft Jamie was someone who was hanging around the citadel at that time, and often the soldiers would call him the Little General, and he would respond to saluting, etc. And the soldiers actually contributed to a fund to send him back to Edinburgh, which inadvertently led to his death. But it's meant in the best way. The other people on the right-hand side of the screen were May, Williams and Bishop, and they were involved in the famous case of the Italian boy in 1831. And there's also a very good book on this if you'd like to read that. Suffice to say, they were accused of burking a young street seller in London, who was an Italian boy who used to walk around with a box, and he had white mice in it. The white mice used to play tricks or whatever, and he'd get the odd pennies to keep himself alive. Both Williams and Bishop were found guilty of this murder and were hanged. Mayer was found not guilty of that offence, but of another crime, and was sentenced to transportation, but he died on the voyage out to Australia. So why did they do it? And now comes to the real crux of it, the economics of this strange wealth. A corpse could fetch, depending on condition, between 7 and 10 guineas. The teeth, which would be extracted, could fetch up to £1 for the set. And if the corpse was a woman, the hair could be cut and sold to wig makers for about 12 to 15 shillings. So when you compare that to the wage of a skilled tailor or carpenter working a 12-hour day for 30 shillings, well, it made sense. Plus, if the diary of a resurrectionist, a copy of which I've got, sad, written in 1812, is to be believed, if you had a good gang, you could get 20 plus corpses in a week. Crown definitely paid. So, slight deviation. If you want to watch these ghouls at work, these movies are worth watching. The Greed of William Hart is based upon Burke and Hare. It was made in the 1940s, but the British Board of Censors told the film company that they could not use their names as it might cause offence. This was 120 years after the offence, but there we are. The one on the right is also based on the same story. It's called The Flesh and the Fiends, starring Donald Pleasance as Hare and George Rose as Burke. Peter Cushing plays Dr. Knox. The most recent one is simply called Burke and Hare 2010, starring Simon Pegg of Mission Impossible fame and Andy Serkis, Gollum of Lord of the Rings. It's not as good as the others, but the lamb pit ending is pretty good. I like that. Todd Slaughter in there with The Greed of William Hart gets an outvote plus because he really does play a good villain. And it's often on Talking Pictures, and I'm sure many of you have enjoyed that channel. So, and now we know why dead bodies were valuable, we can come to the practice of grave robbing in this area. I'm not expecting you to read that small newsprint there. The first instance recorded took place in 1816. There may have been instances before that, but they aren't recorded. In 1816, a Mr. Castle, declaring the name Mister, him being a surgeon, and his two young apprentices were caught taking a body from Castle Street burial ground. One would think that being caught with a dead body in your hands might be quite a problem for your future career. We'll come on to that. However, what must be understood is that due to a court case in 1788, it was established that a dead body had no legal rights, and no one had any legal rights over a dead body. So a dead body could not be stolen, and it had no legal status. So in effect, it wasn't a felony to take a dead body out of the grave. It was a misdemeanour. Really, you were causing a disturbance or something like that. So, Mr. Castle and his apprentices were indicted for taking the body of Anne Swales Gibson. They each received a month's imprisonment, and Mr. Castle was also fined £100, which was a considerable amount in those days, 1816. It didn't harm his career, of course. Mr. Castle was later appointed one of the two surgeons for the School Coast Dispensary and was a resident surgeon for the Refuge, Hull's lunatic asylum at that time. So his conviction did not seem to hinder his career at all. The next case took place in Pesnell. A tailor of that town, Christopher Appleton, was buried in the burial grounds of All Saints on the 21st of October 1822. According to the local papers, when he was buried, his body was in a putrid state. This was on the Sunday. On the following Saturday, 6 days later, his grave was found to have been tampered with. The newspaper explains what had happened. Some depredators had made an opening at the head of the grave, broken part of the coffin, and put in a halter, stolen from Wallace, the Hesel and Hull carrier, about the neck of the corpse, dragged it out of the grave. They then appeared to have been disturbed as the corpse was left with its feet still in the grave and the body bent with the head up in the grave. This case is strange because the grave robbers usually wanted fresh corpses, and Mr. Appleton, after 6 days in the ground, and it was fairly putrid when he went in there, was probably not the freshest. I personally think it was just amateurs, not professionals. Some of you may have noticed such things as these images when you've wandered around cemeteries or burial grounds. And knowing my audience, I'm sure you all do. These metal fences began to be fashionable and also were a way to protect the recently buried members of the family. Sometimes people actually employed night watchmen to stay in the graveyards, complete with a lamp, to deter grave robbers. And sometimes those night watchmen fell asleep and grave robbers, and sometimes those night watchmen knocked on the head and whatever. So metal fences were erected. These were known as mortlakes. The one on the right was one I photographed in Nunhead Cemetery in South London back in 2018. And there were quite a few similar ones there. Nunhead was opened in 1840, well after the Anatomy Act was passed. So it shows that the threat of grave robbing was still evident at that time. But London was a large conurbation, there was a lot of anatomy schools, there would have probably still been some economic value in stealing a body. Most of the mortlakes you'll see in cemeteries these days are ostentatious. They're mainly Victorian, and they're usually simply decorative to highlight the importance of the person buried. Not the one on the right, which is serious stuff, and that's definitely meant to stop people breaking into that too. And of course, there were people making mortlakes. There was a mortsafe, sorry. There was quite a business in it. Note the one on the child on the far right. Beverley and Hedden also suffered from grave robbing. The whole packet of January 1828 said, some of the towns and villages of Holderness have been for the last week or fortnight considerably alarmed at the appearance of two resurrectionists who have been soliciting a job there from most of the principal surgeons. They have visited Hedden and we understand have been twice defeated in their endeavours to procure the body of a young woman interred in the churchyard of Patrington. So they're spread far and wide across the East Riding. But Hull was the major centre of this practice. I love this chap. Usually centred on the burial ground of Holy Trinity, because there was a hole in the wall of the burial ground, and it really was the access point for the grave robbers. And here we first meet Edinburgh Bill. There's no photographs of Edinburgh Bill, there's no images of Edinburgh Bill, but the chap on the left is the best interpretation that could come of Edinburgh Bill. And Edinburgh Bill is a villain. As my grandson would say, he's a bad guy. And he definitely is a bad guy. Edinburgh Bill, his real name was William Ware. Little is known about his early life. I've done some research to try and find out about early life. In the Hull advertisement of November 1804, there was an advert from Henry Mason, cordwainer, about his runaway apprentice. This apprentice is called William Ware, and he is aged 15 years old. So that would have put William being born around about 1790s. A few years later, another William Ware, or maybe the same one, is recorded as a deserter from the Navy. There is no proof that either of these are related to our William Ware, but I would suspect that they're fit, as this man is a genuinely, thoroughly bad chap. Edinburgh Bill was a criminal in many ways, but it was grave robbing that paid the best. Being a criminal, he obviously associated with criminals, and his partner in life, a lady called Anne Sutton, was also of that fraternity. She was recorded in the local press as a street nymph, which is probably shorthand for a prostitute. There may well have been a falling out between the two, or possibly Bill may have become bored with her. Whatever, he asked Anne to accompany him to Mr. Snowden's surgery, and he asked her to steal some surgical tools whilst he engaged the surgeon's apprentice in conversation about a new body he was to get. Anne committed the theft and then went to a local hostelry, and having no money, she left some of the stolen articles as a surety until she had some money. A local constable was informed about this, strangely by Bill's landlady, who was to become his new love interest. The constable arrested Anne and searched their room, and lo and behold, found a broken forceps and a few other things, which was identified by the surgeon's apprentice as having gone missing from the surgery at the time she was there. In the courtroom, Anne asked Bill, who was there for another indictment, some questions with a view to give her an alibi, but Bill said he was fresh with drink and did not recollect the circumstance. A bit like Donald Trump. Her alibi destroyed, she was found guilty and sentenced to be transported. She was out of the way, and now he could make whoopee with his landlady. But you can't keep a good villain down. Edinburgh Bill, as mentioned before, was in court as he had been arrested on the charge of stealing a body from Cotton Graveyard. This was a long, complicated story, and I won't bore you with all of the details. But Bill approached a man in his local pub in Mill Street. So he lived in Mill Street, that's where the landlady lived. And in those days there was a pub called the White Swan, situated in Mill Street. I don't know whether any of you know where Mill Street is these days. Well, there's very little of it left, but it's roughly adjacent to Prospect Centre. So, Mill Street. This man who Bill approached was called John Noblett, and Bill was checking him out as he was a stranger on Bill's patch. Noblett said he was looking for work and had nowhere to stay. Bill offered his accommodation as a lodging, and also he offered him a job. He didn't tell him what the job was until he'd said that he was quite prepared to do it. Walking back to the lodgings, Noblett said Bill wanted a man to go along with him procuring dead bodies, and mentioned a number of places that wanted them. Now, there was a distinct, shall we say, gap between normal criminals and resurrectionists. Normal criminals thought the resurrectionists were beyond the pale. Stealing a dead body, although it might make economic sense, was not something you did. You might knock someone on the head, steal their purse, run away, you might even kill someone, but you wouldn't steal a dead body. It's that kind of differentiation now. I've worked in prisons and probation. It's that differentiation now between the normal criminal and the sex offender. There was that. Don't deal with them dead wrong. Resurrectionists were in that role of sex offenders, I suppose. So they were really bad people. Noblett wasn't impressed with this idea of an offer of a job, and he was shocked. But he wanted somewhere to stay, so he agreed. However, he was very unhappy with this. And when Bill said they would go to Cottingham that night to steal a body, he approached the local constable in Mill Street, brave person, and informed him about this. The constable said to go along with it, and he would provide more police constables. So Bill, Noblett, and another man, Judge Newton, went to the church, and Noblett looked around for the constables, but no one was there. Noblett said that Bill and Newton started to dig the grave and told him to help them, which he did. The body was dug up, and Bill said that as he'd only wanted to snake the leg, but the body was in such good condition, he'd have the rest of it as well. So he put it in a sack and left it behind a bush. These were professionals, the amateurs in Edinburgh Cemetery, wasn't there? Then they walked to Beverley and took lodgings at the Carpenter's Arms. When Bill and Newton slept, Noblett went to inform on them and found another constable. A plan was made. Bill, Newton and Noblett went back to the body and placed it in a hamper first, and then onto the coach to Edinburgh, addressed to a Mr. Lazard. The coach was stopped in Westwood and the body found. Bill, Newton and Noblett were arrested, and the case went to court, where Noblett testified against the other two. In the court, Ware accused Noblett of being a snitch. A snitch wasn't common terminology in those days. It was definitely used by the criminal fraternity, and the magistrates would have thought, okay. Bill and Newton were sentenced to 12 months imprisonment. Bill, on the day he was released from this 12 months imprisonment, went and got drunk. He would with me. And he had a bit of a grudge against the landlord of the Blue Bell. So he went along there when he was drunk and threw some stones through the window. He then swaggered away and promptly fell into a lime pit. These lime pits, I mean, there are health and safety issues here. They must have been all over the place. Anyway, he fell into this lime pit. He was dragged out and arrested for this stone throwing. And he was left in the jail for a couple of days. And when he was brought up before the magistrates, he was in great pain and had lost the use of an eye. The justices let him off the stone throwing, as they probably thought they'd been punished enough. Later still, he was arrested because now that he only had one eye, and that his remaining eye was damaged also by the lime, so he had poor eyesight. He was having to go about with a knife, which he said was his own protection, because obviously he wasn't well liked. He was a resurrectionist, and his neighbours wanted to harm him. Newton, his fellow criminal buddy, stole all his clothes and valuables. Bill eventually disappears from history, but one hopes that he ended up on an anatomist lab. Before we look at the last two cases, let's just remind ourselves of the reason why such acts occur. Basically, the growth of anatomy schools led to dead bodies being valuable, so there's a market for them. The heyday of the anatomy schools lasted round about a century, from 1760 to 1860. After that, such learning and instruction was conducted inside hospital, so the need for separate anatomy schools disappeared. In the early days, the major anatomy schools were in London and Edinburgh, but one or two sprang up in other towns during the first years of the 19th century. Hull was not one of those. The first anatomy school in Hull was opened in 1833 by Dr. James Alderson, after the passing of the Anatomy Act that year. And it opened in Kingston Square, and it later became the Land Institute building, and still later the Cooperative Institute, and that frontage is still there, and there's another building behind it, and that frontage is listed. Grade 1, I think, Grade 1 listed. So, however, Paul wasn't as squeaky clean about such things as you might imagine. This image is taken from Greenwood's Pictures of Hull, dated roughly around the mid-1830s. It shows the medicine school, newly opened, in the front. What you might also see is a low building at the back with a chimney sticking out. This building was situated in Charles Street, and it too was a medical school, and it opened in 1831. In this small building, Dr. Alderson gave the first lecture there, and the building was known as the Hull and East Riding School of Medicine. Nothing so crass as anatomy. However, locally, it was known as the dissection room. Here it is on Anderson's 1818 map. Sorry, moving that building. So you can place it now. That's Charles Street, and it's the only building on the east side. It had already been involved in a case of body stealing in October 1832, when William Wallace and William Jones were caught taking a body there from Castle Street. Wallace realised that they were being watched, and so left the cart and went to the door of the dissecting room, where he was arrested by a constable. He said that he knew nothing about the body in the cart, had never seen Jones in his life before, and that he worked in the dissecting room as a cleaner, which was true. But the constables produced the owner of the donkey and cart, who said he'd been approached by Wallace and Jones at 4:30 that morning to hire the cart and donkey for a job there. Both of them, their defence destroyed, both of them went down for 12 months each. And now we come to the final case. And this happened after the passing of the Anatomy Act in 1832. And my distant relative was involved. On the side of the road, on the side of the road. In January 1834, Samuel Lowden, tea dealer, who was residing in number 1 Holderness Road, and that shop is still there. Well, I don't think it sells cheese anymore. He was living down Side Street. Excuse me. He was living down Side Street. And he pulled a gig up, which was basically a cart. He pulled a gig up to Skullcoats Hall, the site of the old fire station in Worship Street. Next slide. Another map, just to show you how stupid these great robbers were. He pulled a gig up to Skullcoats Hall, the site of the old fire station in Worship Street, and he asked to see the chief constable of the borough, Charles Fox, because he had found this gig with a body in it in Charles Street. The body was of an elderly female. She was wrapped in an old piece of sackcloth, and she was naked under that, except for a wristband. To cut a very long story short, it appeared that a chap called Robert Freeman had been passing Castle Street burial ground when he saw 3 men, one of whom said, "There's no one about," which made him suspicious. He saw one of the men go to the burial ground and come back carrying something over his shoulder. Freeman said it was a large bundle, big enough for a body. He then followed them from Castle Street all the way to Kingston Square. He said one of them went to the front door of the new medical school, and he said a conversation took place at which the men pulled the gig around the block to the back door, which had been the entrance to the dissection room. In fact, they actually went past Skullcoats Hall. So basically, Castle Street, they came up here, right, up Savile Street, right, and then they went to the door, there, right, and then what they did was, they went round that way and came back again, so they actually went past, basically, the police station. And this was early in the morning, but come on. Anyway, sorry. At this point, Freeman went for help and saw Samuel Lowden. And what he was doing wandering on about as far as I don't know. Freeman asked Lowden, he asked him, where was the constable? And Samuel said, Sykes Street. So Freeman went off, leaving Samuel in charge of the gig, as the men, saying that they were being watched, scattered. So Samuel, as we said, took the gig to the chief constable. The gig was traced to a James Goddard Jr., whose father owned the gig and hired out horses, carts and gigs. James Goddard said he hired out the gig to someone the day before. Sadly, he hadn't taken the person's name. Nobody asked for a deposit. George Seaton, an employee of Goddard's, and John Rainey, an apprentice also employed there, were arraigned at court for this offence. The court examined these 2 men, but frankly they had doubts about Goddard's evidence, because it sounded strange to the magistrates. You wouldn't hire out a gig, and you definitely would not take a deposit. So, Goddard denied anything to do with the crime, but his defence fell apart, much like Wallace and Jones in the previous case, because Freeman came to court and said Goddard was the man carrying the body. Goddard, Seaton and Rainey were found guilty. And the problem here, for the magistrates, and for the defendants definitely, was the question of whether this was a felony or a misdemeanour. A misdemeanour, as we said, something like a disturbance of the peace. A felony would get you 7 years on a boat to Australia. And the reason why this could have been viewed as a felony was because the lady in question had a wristband as part of their chemise, which had been ripped off, and it was still around the body. So in fact, it was theft. It was stealing. The body had no rights, but they're stealing this part of the nightgown. So the magistrates deliberated, and they decided to be merciful. So they gave them the benefit of the doubt, and they treated it as a misdemeanour, but there was still a sentence, 3 months imprisonment, hard living. And that was the last case of grave robbing in this area. In June of that year, Dr. Somerville, a government inspector set up by the Anatomy Act, visited Hull to explain the consequences of the Act, especially for surgeons and medical staff. And I quote, "The legislator has made provision for the wants of anatomical schools. It ought to be remembered that from the vile trade of the resurrectionists sprang those horrible atrocities new to the records of crime which have been enrolled in our language under the name of their first detected perpetrators. The plunderers of the tomb rarely commenced their revolting occupation until they have acquired the habits of the ruffian. With every midnight expedition, they become more desperately hardened until they at last begin to regard a fellow creature in no other light than as a marketable article. Medical men who hold any communication with these wretches stain the character of a profession second to none in worth and dignity. We will not permit ourselves to imagine that their presence is welcome at any medical institution in this country." And with those words, the medical profession is given a clear warning, with the result of grave robbing in the whole area. And to an end. Thank you.
Any questions anyone would like to pose to Pete before he gives his place at the podium back?
It's not going to be an awkward question.
Sorry?
It's not going to be an awkward question.
Really?
Yeah, no. I was just wondering, like this picture that's on the screen now, a few of them showed the method of extracting the body from the grave by tying a rope around the neck and yanking it out.
Yep.
Do you think that's artistic license? Because if you wanted to keep the body intact, it seems like a high-risk method of doing it. You know, it seems like quite easily you could yank. I'm being slightly flippant.
No.
If you want to sell the body for the maximum price, you presumably need to keep the head attached to the body.
Yeah.
And if you yank it with a rope around the neck, it could come off.
You're quite right, Tim. You're quite right. And artistic license. I mean, this one's terrible. I mean, the head would come off, wouldn't it? Sorry. What they used to do, apparently, obviously I haven't been a witness to this, but apparently what they used to do was to dig down at the head end for about a space about the size of this lectern, so it covered roughly where the shoulder of the coffin would be. They'd break that coffin, and then they would slip a rope, halter under the arms, and then pull it out, right? So they pull it out through the widest point. And as you're right, quite right. I mean, these people, obviously amateurs, that come away with the head. All right, you could sell the teeth and you could sell the hair, but they've left most of the rest there. So yes, that's what they would do. They'd pull it up, pull the body up. Yeah. Any more dubious questions?
In the excavations at St John's burial ground, there are quite a number of security devices found in graves, weren't there?
Yeah.
Something great big iron bars staked into the ground. We've got quite a few photographs of those, I think.
Yeah. That was a thriving industry to protect bodies, because obviously the burials would take place and the report of the burial would be in the local newspaper, and I'm sure that resurrectionists were like this, scouring through and thinking, and they would be heading off. As I said, there used to be a night watchman. There was a night watchman employed in this church for Castle Street, but there was some doddery old chap and falling asleep, and maybe the resurrectionist might turn up and say, would you like a drink? And he's away and gone. So you wanted to try and get something else. Often people would be buried in lead caskets, and that much harder to break into. But it shows that in some ways it was an efficient. It was a viable industry. It was a viable industry to actually steal bodies. And in some ways that was reprehensible, and We don't like it, but medicine moved on from that practice. Where it really took a dark turn was when people started murdering people before they actually died and selling their bodies, which is very dubious at best. But yeah, those moat safes, you'll find them quite common. The Victorian ones, though, if you go to a churchyard and somebody's buried in the 1850s, 1860s, it's just decorative. It's just decorative. Unfortunately, Hull General Cemetery had quite a few, but they were sewn off for the war effort. Winston Churchill's steal all the railings and knock them down and make tanks out of cast iron. But yeah. Any more?
I just wondered whether or not his eye was sent to the mortuary.
Sorry, Jimmy.
You know the gentleman who lost his eye because he was dropped into the lime.
Edinburgh Bill.
Yes, his skull would have been quite interesting, wouldn't it, with one eye gone, but the other eye was still intact to a certain extent.
Yeah, we'd probably take some money off losing the eye. Yeah. I like to think that he did end up with that slap and that somebody took him apart, literally. Yeah, he was a very nasty piece of work. And I really love an image of him. Sorry?
Why were the lime pits around? Why did we have lime pits around?
I would suggest that it was related probably to house building at that time. A lot of lime wash. It was probably used in making bricks, etc. And there was a lot of brick building sites, brick pits. So it was probably something like that. But obviously, you had to be careful how much you drank. And street lighting wasn't really in those days either. So it might have been a bit of a problem. I do recommend read a good in that. Talking pictures, well done. Todd Slaughter, terrible. A really good Victorian woman. If you had a moustache, you'd be twirling.
Very appropriate name as well for an actor to be in a film like that.
Todd Slaughter.
Yeah.
He was quite big in the 40s, but you don't really hear of him.
And Daft Jamie's in it as well.
Daft Jamie.
Daft Jamie's in it.
He is in that, isn't he? Yeah. It's a nice movie. It's a happy ending.
It's really nice.
Any more? Go on, don't be shy. Get it out. Come on, all the questions you really want to do. Oh? All yours, Jim.
We've got one more. From your favourite.
Why do you always think the worst of me? Just asking for a speculation, really. When they'd extracted the teeth, cut the hair off, performed all the experiments and bits they wanted on the body, what do you reckon they did with it?
There was a lot of lamb pits about it.
Just chuck somewhere and dump
Yes.
it?
Yeah. There wouldn't be that much left.
No.
You saw that image of Hogarth. Ooh, let's go back.
Yes, the entrance.
I mean, you know, there's a dog eating a piece of flesh at the bottom here. You know, there wouldn't really be that much left.
The likes of Sweeney Todd would have been interested, wouldn't he?
Indeed, meat pies.
Meat pies.
You're the one who starts this. No more? Thank you.
Can we give him one more big round of applause? Well, thank you very much, Pete. Really interesting to hear about that, especially the whole bit about the dead bodies having no legal rights and then getting caught up on the wristband. It's ridiculous. It's the ridiculousness of history, but it's the reason we enjoy it so much. Thank you all for attending this iteration of the Minster Heritage Talks. I really hope you enjoyed it. I have to do my bit, as I always do, and plug the Minster at the very end here. As I mentioned in the introduction, this is part of our 600th anniversary, so we've got quite a lot of these heritage talks coming up as well. The next one is on August the 8th, and it is regarding the English Civil War. If you know any of your East Yorkshire history, you know there's quite a lot of flashpoints that happened in Hull regarding the Civil War. That's being hosted by Richard Clark, who's done a talk here already. He did a really good job. So I hope if you like your military, social, political history, you can join us here for that. Our next major event outside the Heritage Talks is not till September with Heritage Open Days. We've got quite a lot on store there. We've got a lot of workshops taking place around the church. We have some of the memorials in the church coming to life, period actors reprising the roles of some of the deceased people around the church, including Mr. Alderson, who was mentioned, the medical institutions he founded in Hull. So you can ask him maybe about if he knew what his hospitals kind of got up to afterwards. And now new, the music director is going to do a virtual tour of the inside of the organ as well. So someone's actually going to go up and stream the inside of the organ. You can look at all the, like 6,000 pipes in the organ, and he'll do a demonstration of it for you as well as part of Heritage Open Days. It's the first time something like this has been done in Hull, Minster, as far as I'm aware. So if you want to see the inside of the organ, come to Heritage Open Days, 12th of September and 13th of September. But the organ tour is on the 12th in the afternoon, so please do come for that. Obviously it's lunchtime, so please go to the cafe and grab yourself a bite on the way out. And the last thing I have to plug, as I always do, is that the Minster is a very expensive building to maintain, and we want to continue to maintain that for generations so that we can host events like this, and so that we can keep this as a living, breathing space for the community going forward. We're 600 years old, we're probably a little older than that, and we want to keep being this living, breathing space for the community. So if you can make a donation on the way out, that would be super much appreciated. Thank you all for attending, much appreciated.
So you're going to do your duty now, aren't you?
They pay me for attending.
No.
So I've got a bunch more of these small ones, obviously, but if you want to take this one, I don't know how well you'll be able to carry around without damaging it too much.
Not the insects for a show, just.
Right, okay.
Well, he hasn't got a chance to
We can't. We obviously don't. We don't want to demonstrate as well. Well, it would be funny if we could. They can't. We have tried, and everywhere in the Minster seems to work except the chancel microphones. We've got no way. There might be a way to put a second speaker in the back there, which I'll think about. But this is the first time we've actually had the chancel fill up so much where we've had to push it so far. So,
I was looking at the seats outside and I thought to myself, no,
yeah, I know.
I mean, all right, this is a good view for this
Kids have got the same gene.
and the space has the fixed
Serial killer talks and things like that.
My other problem is that
Oh, she's got the cable
you can say this, it's no detail. Anyway, sorry, thank you.
Well, if
So I'll send some of these out.
eventually.
do you want to put about half of those?
I managed to
Dead in it?
we can reach the ATM for the
I know the blitz building. Yeah, the one
I'm trying to explain it to Kate. The ham is a
so bad.
yeah, it is so bad.
Just load of walls. I mean, all right, on this side. But I was just, it was a 400. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Of course not. Thank you for coming by.
No. I enjoyed what I could hear, but I couldn't do it
Yeah.
because I've got eyesight problems. So I'm going to have